Welcome back. This time it might be different. Florida's stand your ground law has been controversial from the get-go, and legislators, in their infinite wisdom or lack thereof, made it even more so by putting the burden on prosecutors to prove shooters had no reason to fear for their safety. But in the tragic case of last week's shooting in Clearwater, a growing number of supporters of Stand Your Ground are arguing Sheriff Gualtieri screwed up, that the shooting of the unarmed man at a parking space dispute was not a legitimate case for Stand Your Ground. And joining us for more are Jeff Young, known locally as the gun lawyer, Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report, and Jacob Ogles of SRQ Magazine. And Jeff, I'm most interested what your opinion is, because you are a fierce defender of the Second Amendment and Stand Your Ground. In your opinion, was this a proper application of the Stand Your Ground law?
Well, the problem is it's kind of hard for me to make that opinion without knowing all of the facts. I am surprised that he was not arrested, because it's been my experience that generally law enforcement officers always arrest when there's a firearm incident and then let the state attorney's office and the lawyers sort it out later. So I'm surprised that they didn't arrest him. But I have seen the video like everybody else, but I haven't interviewed the witnesses, I didn't interview the shooter, so I don't have all the facts.
But based on what you see on the video, do you have an opinion?
Based on what I see on the video, my initial reaction is the same as everybody else's, is it does appear to not be the best case for an argument for a Stand Your Ground. I think that the video is broke up into two segments. In the beginning, when he's shoved down and he's in fear, and if the guy came to him, he could draw, but there does appear to be a break in the chain of action where after he drew his gun, the individual appears to have put his hands up and walked away and was trying to de-escalate the situation, and he fired anyway. So I think there are going to be some questions with this case. I would be very surprised if the state attorney's office did not overrule the sheriff's office and decide to go ahead and file charges. But again, all I'm looking at is a video clip. I don't have all of the evidence, so I can't really jump on the sheriff without having all the information he does.
But Susan, Jeff is not alone here. In fact, I believe the defense lawyer in the Trayvon Martin case has also looked at this and said that this does not appear to be the right application of Stand Your Ground.
And I would agree with that sentiment as well. I don't think, I mean, knowing the totality of the circumstances and that the individual with the gun was the initial aggressor, what we don't know is what was said, what words were exchanged.
Go ahead.
Well, you can disagree with it, but I'll stand on that, is that he prompted this whole argument, and then whatever words were exchanged, the words don't, it's hard to determine what words would allow him to fear for his safety based on the body language that we saw in the video.
Jacob, the Stand Your Ground law and issues like this it's never been more of a hot button issue in our area. People, either you feel one way about it or another.
I guess. I mean, one thing that's important to remember about Stand Your Ground is that it's an extension of the self-defense statute in the state of Florida. And I have seen some people argue that even before Stand Your Ground law was passed, that could have been brought up as an argument. Like the other panelists here, I'm a little surprised the sheriff went ahead and declared from the beginning that Stand Your Ground applied, rather than letting that get argued out in the court system. But I don't know. I think there's more wiggle room and more debate room in terms of Stand Your Ground than perhaps it may seem.
And we will get more into that in a moment. Our conversation on the Stand Your Ground law continues. Welcome back. We are debating whether last week's shooting in Clearwater was a legitimate case of Stand Your Ground or was it murder. Joining us for more are Jeff Young, known locally as the gun lawyer, Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report, and Jacob Ogles of SRQ Magazine. I want to get to the politics of this in our next segment, but let's break down what we saw on the videotape. Jeff, your point was that there seems to been a gap between the victim shoving the gunman and apparently backing up when the gun was drawn. But what about what precipitated this event? There was a dispute over the victim's girlfriend parking in a handicap parking space, and the gunman taking issue with that. What role does the gunman's aggressiveness in that situation have on whether or not this was a legitimate case of Stand Your Ground?
Well, I think the issue with this case is it does appear to be, I wouldn't say a comedy of errors, because obviously it's a tragedy of errors. So you have somebody parking in a handicapped space for apparently no reason whatsoever. You have somebody who apparently thinks that, I don't know, maybe it's his job to police that particular handicapped parking space. I think there's been evidence that he's done that before. But it appears that, to me, that he's engaging in, sure, a verbal altercation with the person. And then you have somebody who comes out and actually escalates that from a verbal altercation into a physical one. I didn't see anything in the video to indicate that that person coming out of the store had any reason to believe that his wife was in danger or being threatened or anything along those lines, to where he needed to put his hands on another human being. So in the video, the only person that I saw who actually committed an unprovoked assault was the individual who ended up being shot. Now, that doesn't justify the shooting later on in the incident, but that is what escalated into a physical conversation that allowed him to claim self-defense in the first place.
Susan?
So I would almost agree with Jeff, except for the fact that he's discounting the idea that we don't know what was verbally said. The video that we're basing our opinions on is silent. So a threat can come in many different ways. And yes, you're right. The gentleman did escalate it by laying his hands on that individual, but we also have to take into the fact that he also pulled away and he was also de-escalating it. And at some point in time, there, at least from a humanity standpoint, we have to start accepting responsibility for our actions at all different levels. And at some point, he should, he had the right to retreat.
Jacob, how is this
You don't have to,
playing
though,
among
understand
the
your ground.
public?
Oh, well, obviously, I think it's escalated the feelings of those people who are longtime opponents of the stand your ground law. I think this particular case is politically dicey because, as we're seeing here with Jeff, the supporters of the stand your ground law aren't necessarily in 100% agreement on whether it should apply here. So in terms of that, I think there's a net escalation in enthusiasm on opponents of the law.
We are just getting warmed up. Our conversation on your stand your ground law will continue right after a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are debating whether last week's shooting in Clearwater was a legitimate case of stand your ground or was it murder. Joining us for more are Jeff Young, known locally as the gun lawyer, Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report, and Jacob Ogles of SRQ Magazine. Jeff, you were telling us during the break, even in some of the chat groups that you're involved with in terms of supporters of the Second Amendment, it's split in terms of...
Absolutely, there's no question about it. I mean, I've posted about this and blogged about it on my Facebook page and all the other large Facebook page and social medias around, and it is very divided right now. There are some people that say this is a clear-cut case of murder and the guy wasn't justified in shooting, and then you get a bunch of other people that say, look, the guy was, 20 years younger than him, twice his size, he knocked him down for no reason. And it could go both ways. Everybody's in agreement that stand your ground is a good law, but this particular case is very divisive.
Is in agreement.
Well,
in my group is, yes.
In his
Obviously,
world.
and to his point, real quick, because he's correct. What this has done, I think, is it's only bolstered the people who didn't like stand your ground in the first place, and it's only entrenched people who like stand your ground. So like all other guns, it's just the same divide we always see.
That raises some fascinating questions. Number one, especially since a lot of folks in the legal community are questioning whether the sheriff made the right decision in this case, and it's my understanding the sheriff himself has a law degree. Do you see that the sheriff has been trying, has the sheriff, did he make his decision for a reason that maybe this will be litigated further or there will be some more debate taking place on it?
I mean, it's possible. Again, the issue is all we are seeing these little clips of the video. We don't have the witness statements. As was pointed out, there is no audio. We don't know what people were saying. Maybe after he shoved him down, he said, I'm going to kill you or I'm going to come after you, and that's why he drew his gun. I don't like making judgments on cases that I don't have all the facts for. I trust that the sheriff has all the facts, and that's what he based his decision on. Now, I know the sheriff has a past when it comes to Second Amendment rights. He's not necessarily a big supporter of them, so is it possible that maybe he has some other long-term agenda or something that he's playing out here? I don't know, but all I know is I don't know everything about the case, so I think it's easy for us to sit here as not being the people who were shoved down on the ground and had a man standing over us, or the person who did the shoving, to really pass judgment. Right. That's what the law and the courts are for.
So now the state's attorney will be looking at this case. Would you be surprised if the state's attorney would reach a different conclusion?
Yeah, I think my gut tells me the state's attorney will take this up. I think
meaning he would charge him.
He would, yes. I think he would be charged with murder on this, or at least, I don't know. I don't even know. Jeff would probably be better at naming all the charges that are available. But I think that number one, if there wasn't a video, it might be a different story. but the video is already out there. There's a lot of people debating it, and there's a lot of focus on it. So for the state attorney to just walk away, especially in probably soon to be a political year, it'll be a really hard thing to swallow.
Jacob, there's a lot of editorials out there about this. The Tampa Bay Times says stand your ground law triggers vigilante justice. I know we just had the legislature redefine stand your ground recently, but might this be the impetus for another debate in the state legislature?
It feels like every year we have another impetus for the further debate on this law in the Florida legislature, and it's been that way from the beginning. I covered a stand your ground law for the Fort Myers News Press 11 years ago, where people who voted for the original stand your ground law were saying it was being misapplied, and it was coming up for conversation again. This has been happening since this law originated, and I think, yes, this is going to be debated in the legislature once again.
But here's the question. On one hand, the state legislature did something this past year it has not done in many years, and that is adopt more stricter gun control in the aftermath of Parkland. But Susan, we're in a political campaign right now where the Democrats are hoping to make huge gains in the state legislature and in the governor's mansion. Will Democrats take this up in this election with this much on the line?
I'd be surprised if they didn't. I really would. With what happened at Parkland and with all the activity from the students, and even, like Phil Levine, who is running for governor, he's taken a very anti-NRA stance, and a lot of even local politicians have done the same. So I don't think they would be afraid of this at all. This would be a really good topic to discuss and to use as a part of the reason that they needed to be elected.
Jeff, based on this situation and the uncertainty we all have about it, is there something that the legislature should look at?
No, I mean, I'm actually quite satisfied with the way the stand your ground law is. I disagree with Derek Byrd. He's a colleague of mine. We've known each other for years, but I haven't seen any sort of large uptick in any sort of wild, wild west phrase that you always hear, or vigilante justice. You have shootings taking place now that have always taken place, and just like always in the past, law enforcement investigates it, they make a decision, then the state attorney's office will investigate it, they make a decision, then it goes through the court system. It's not any different than it always has been.
How often do
Not
you...
true.
Okay, let me ask this question first. How often do you have a situation where police, the sheriff, decline to charge, but the prosecutor reverses that and goes ahead?
It's rare that you have law enforcement that doesn't make an arrest in these cases.
I would agree.
And I don't think it's that rare for them to be overturned by the state attorney's office, especially when politics come involved. I mean, George Zimmerman, they originally didn't arrest him, and then it became a big political issue, and they charged him, I think, only for political reasons, and they ended up looking like idiots by the time the trial rolls around. Could that happen in this particular case? I think there's a huge possibility of it, but I've seen local prosecutors overrule decisions by law enforcement all the time.
But the fact that in this case the sheriff did not charge, and you're saying that you would not be surprised if the prosecutors did, doesn't that kind of underscore the question out there that maybe the legislature should try to address?
But I'm not sure what they would address. I mean, all it says, all this stand your ground did, as was pointed out earlier, is it extended the castle doctrine from your house out in the public, and you no longer have a duty to retreat. It did add a few extra things, such as law enforcement needs to make an initial determination of whether it was self-defense, et cetera, et cetera. But what would you change? You take that out, and then everybody just gets arrested when there's a firearm charge, and then they got to spend thousands of dollars, they got to lose their job, and maybe their livelihood.
Jeff is also forgetting that the onus is now put on the state's attorney's office to prove that there was a stand your ground issue, as opposed to before when it left it up to the defendant to prove that he didn't commit a crime. And I think that's a big difference right there. And also, I mean, Jacob...
But I think that's a good difference. I mean, you work in the public defender's office, you work for the ACLU, you don't want the state to have to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt before they throw you in prison for the rest of their life. I would think you'd be in favor of that.
Yeah, but it's really hard to defend
yourself. Except when it comes to guns.
But it's hard to defend yourself when you're dead, you know?
Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things, and we see that constantly in these cases. We saw it in the Trayvon Martin case, we see it here, is that there's an account that's missing from this entire discussion. And that's where Stand Your Ground has kind of muddied some of the conversation.
The account that you're talking about is that the victim
The
cannot...
victim cannot speak and explain their portion of what happened. So you're only getting one person's perspective and maybe a few witnesses if they're there.
Or you have a video in this case which shows.
Or you have a video, but obviously we're already having a dispute of who's responsible and who's the aggressor based on that video. So it's a challenge, and the one person who you really need to hear from is dead. So that is a big problem, and it has changed greatly
But
throughout.
that's always the way it's been in murder cases. If the person is dead, they can never speak about whether it's
Yeah,
self-defense
except
or home
usually-
invasion or
But
whichever.
one of the things that we see regularly with these cases is if not for that person being dead, they could just as easily claim that they were defending themselves.
Correct.
Instead, we don't have that testimony to put on the equation.
And someone
But then
gets
what's the
arrested.
alternative? Everybody gets arrested and they have to go to court to prove their innocence? That's not how it works in America. The state has to
What?
prove it. You're presumed
What?
innocent until...
We've got an entire county jail
until
filled
given.
with people who have to prove their innocence.
And they shouldn't have to. Again, as an ACLU lawyer and a public defender, you should be against that. I'm against that. It's presumption of innocence. The state should have to prove you were guilty. And if the other person is dead and can't give their story, I don't know how else you fix that other than to just say, well, that person can't tell their story, so now you're the one who has
Yeah,
to
but
go to
you don't-
jail.
You don't walk away from it and say, hey, they were statutorily correct. They had stand your ground behind them, so nobody's held accountable.
The cops don't have to. They
This
just
has
decide to
been
in this
really
case.
great. I really haven't had to ask a question for the last 5 minutes.
Sorry.
And I don't even get the bill for it. So.
Folks, thank you very much. We want to thank our guests, Jeffy Young, known locally as the gun lawyer, Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report, and Jacob Ogles of SRQ Magazine.